He called me just a black nurse and demanded I be fired. Little did he know I own the hospital and his company's biggest contract. My name is Dr. Diane Thompson, though for the past 3 years I've simply been Nurse Thompson to everyone at Mercy General Hospital. What happened last Tuesday changed everything, and Marcus Sterling learned the most expensive lesson of his billionaire life. Let me take you back to the beginning of the most satisfying day of my career. The ambulance screamed into Mercy General's emergency bay at 3:47 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was working my regular shift in the ER, something I'd been doing for 3 years since I bought this hospital. Yes, you heard that right. I own this place, but more on that later. The paramedics wheeled in a man in his 50s, conscious but clearly in distress. Expensive suit, designer watch, the kind of perfectly styled hair that costs more than most people's monthly salary. Classic symptoms of a heart attack: chest pain, shortness of breath, sweating profusely. Male, 52 years old, possible myocardial infarction, the paramedic reported as they transferred him to our gurney. Patient was in a board meeting when symptoms started. Very agitated, keeps demanding to speak to whoever's in charge. I immediately began my assessment, checking vitals while Dr. Martinez, our head of cardiology, was being paged. The man's eyes focused on me with obvious displeasure. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice strained but still carrying unmistakable arrogance. "I'm Nurse Thompson. I'm going to take care of you while we wait for the doctor." His eyes narrowed as he took in my appearance. A black woman in scrubs, focused on my job rather than his obvious wealth and status. "I want a real doctor. Now, do you people not understand who I am?" I continued checking his blood pressure, maintaining my professional demeanor. "Sir, I need you to stay calm. Dr. Martinez will be here momentarily. Right now, my priority is making sure you're stable." "Your priority," he sneered, "should be getting someone qualified to treat me. I'm Marcus Sterling, Sterling Technologies. Perhaps you've heard of us, though I doubt it." Sterling Technologies. Of course I'd heard of them. They were one of our hospital's biggest technology contractors, providing the computer systems that ran everything from patient records to medical equipment. A $50 million annual contract that kept our hospital at the cutting edge of medical technology. What Marcus Sterling didn't know was that I'd personally approved that contract. Dr. Martinez arrived within minutes, a skilled cardiologist I'd specifically recruited when I took over the hospital. As he began his examination, Sterling's hostility toward me only intensified. "Doctor, thank God," Sterling gasped. "This nurse has been inadequate. I need proper care, not whatever passes for medical attention from the support staff." Dr. Martinez glanced at me with confusion. He knew my background, knew exactly who I was, but followed my long-standing instruction to maintain my cover as just another nurse. "Nurse Thompson is excellent," Dr. Martinez replied diplomatically. "She's provided exactly the care you need." While Dr. Martinez examined Sterling, I prepared the medication and monitoring equipment. Every move I made was professional, competent, based on years of medical training that Sterling couldn't possibly know about. "I want her removed from my case," Sterling announced loudly enough for other staff to hear. "I don't feel comfortable with her kind handling my medical care. Surely you have more qualified personnel." The ER went quiet. Several nurses and doctors turned to stare, their faces showing a mixture of shock and anger. In 3 years of working alongside these people, they'd never heard anyone speak to me or anyone else with such blatant racism. Dr. Martinez's face hardened. "Mr. Sterling, Nurse Thompson is one of our most experienced and capable nurses. She will continue to provide your care." "We'll see about that," Sterling muttered, then turned to me with a cold smile. What's your supervisor's name? I want to speak to whoever's in charge of this place. By tomorrow, you'll be looking for a new job. I simply nodded and continued my work. I'll make sure the message gets to the right person, sir. If only he knew. While Sterling was stabilized and moved to the cardiac unit, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. Few people knew my real story, how a kid from Detroit's inner city had become one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in the country, only to return to her first love, nursing. 20 years ago, I was Dr. Diane Thompson, fresh out of medical school, working as a resident in Chicago. But I'd always been fascinated by technology, spending my free time developing software solutions for medical problems. What started as a side project, a patient management system that could predict complications before they became critical, turned into something much bigger. Thompson Medical Systems grew from my apartment into a billion-dollar company that revolutionized healthcare technology. Hospitals worldwide used our systems to save lives, improve efficiency, and reduce costs. By the time I was 45, I was worth $3.2 billion and had been featured on the cover of Forbes twice. But I was miserable. I'd achieved every measure of success our society values, yet I felt empty. I missed the direct patient care that had drawn me to medicine in the first place. I missed the human connection, the immediate impact of healing someone with my own hands rather than through computer algorithms. So I did something that shocked the business world. I sold Thompson Medical Systems for $4.5 billion and disappeared from the tech scene entirely. Most of my fortune went into a charitable foundation, but I kept enough to pursue my real dream: owning and operating a hospital where excellent patient care mattered more than profit margins. Mercy General had been struggling financially when I bought it 3 years ago. I invested hundreds of millions in new equipment, recruited the best doctors, and created a culture focused on compassionate care. But here's the part that would have blown Marcus Sterling's mind. I didn't buy the hospital to sit in a boardroom. I went back to nursing school, got certified, and started working regular shifts because I genuinely loved patient care. My staff knew my background, but we'd agreed to keep it quiet. I wanted to be judged on my nursing skills, not my net worth. For 3 years, I'd been simply Nurse Thompson to patients, and it had been the most fulfilling period of my life. Until Marcus Sterling decided to remind me why systemic change sometimes requires more than just leading by example. Sterling's condition stabilized overnight, but his attitude didn't improve. Throughout his stay, he continued demanding that I be removed from his care. When that didn't work, he began making calls. "I want to speak to your hospital administrator," he told Dr. Martinez during morning rounds. "This is unacceptable. I'm telling you, that black nurse is going to cost this hospital its Sterling Technologies contract if she's not dealt with appropriately." Dr. Martinez looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Sterling, perhaps you should focus on your recovery." "Don't tell me what to focus on," Sterling snapped. "Do you have any idea how much money my company brings to this hospital? Our contract alone probably pays that nurse's salary for 5 years. I want her gone, or you'll all be gone." That afternoon, Sterling managed to get my supervisor, head nurse Patricia Wilson, on the phone. Patricia had been with the hospital for 15 years and was one of the most respected nurses in the state. She was also one of the few people who knew exactly who I was. "I'm filing a formal complaint," Sterling told her, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to getting his way. "That Thompson woman is incompetent, unprofessional, and frankly, I question whether she's qualified to be in a hospital at all. I want her fired immediately, or I'll make sure this hospital loses some very important contracts." Patricia's response was careful but firm. Mr. Sterling, I'll make sure your concerns are brought to the attention of the appropriate authority. However, I can assure you that Nurse Thompson is fully qualified and has provided excellent care. We'll see, Sterling replied coldly. I've already called my attorneys. If she's still employed here by Friday, there will be consequences. That evening, Patricia came to find me as I was finishing my shift. Diane, we need to talk. Sterling is serious about this. He's threatening legal action, contract cancellation, the works. Maybe it's time. I'd been thinking the same thing. For 3 years, I'd enjoyed the anonymity of being just another nurse. But Sterling's behaviour wasn't just about me. It was about every healthcare worker who'd ever been dismissed, disrespected, or threatened by someone who thought money made them untouchable. Set up a meeting, I told Patricia. Tomorrow morning, tell Mr. Sterling that the hospital administrator wants to discuss his concerns personally. Patricia smiled knowingly. Should I tell him anything else? Just that his concerns have reached the highest level of hospital management, and we take them very seriously. The next morning, Patricia wheeled Sterling to the hospital's executive conference room. His cardiac episode had been mild, and he was scheduled for discharge that afternoon, but he'd insisted on this meeting before leaving. Finally, Sterling muttered as Patricia positioned his wheelchair at the conference table. Someone who understands the gravity of this situation. The conference room was impressive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a massive mahogany table, walls lined with awards and certifications. Sterling's eyes took in the obvious expense of the decor, probably calculating how much of it his company's contract had funded. The administrator will be with you shortly, Patricia said, struggling to keep the amusement out of her voice. Sterling spent the next 10 minutes rehearsing his complaints, muttering about incompetent staff and professional standards. He pulled out his phone several times, probably calling his lawyers or assistants to prepare for the battle he thought was coming. At exactly 10 a.m., the conference room door opened. I walked in wearing a tailored business suit instead of scrubs, my hair styled professionally, carrying a leather portfolio that contained documents Sterling couldn't possibly imagine. The expression on his face was worth every second of abuse I'd endured over the past 2 days. Mr. Sterling, I said, taking the seat at the head of the table. I'm Dr. Diane Thompson, Chief Executive Officer and owner of Mercy General Hospital. I understand you have some concerns about your nursing care. Sterling's mouth opened and closed several times without sound emerging. His face went through a series of colour changes, pale white, then red, then an interesting shade of purple that made me briefly concerned about his cardiac status. But you're, he stammered. The black nurse who's been taking care of you? Yes, that's correct. I opened my portfolio and pulled out the first document. I'm also the person who approves all major hospital contracts, including your company's $50 million annual agreement with us. Sterling's eyes fixed on the contract I'd placed on the table, his signature prominently visible on the final page. This can't be right, he whispered. You're a nurse. You were just a black woman in scrubs, so I couldn't possibly be anything more. I completed his thought. Mr. Sterling, I have an MD from Johns Hopkins, an MBA from Wharton, and until 3 years ago, I was the CEO of Thompson Medical Systems. Perhaps you've heard of us. The colour drained completely from Sterling's face. Thompson Medical Systems. Every tech CEO knew that name. The company that had revolutionised healthcare technology, that had been sold for billions to Microsoft in a deal that had dominated business headlines for months. Thompson Medical, he breathed. You're DJ Thompson. But the Thompson who sold to Microsoft was a black woman, yes. though most business publications preferred to use my initials and focus on my technology rather than my appearance. I pulled out another document. This is quite interesting, actually. Your company's software systems. They're built on infrastructure originally developed by Thompson Medical. So, in a very real sense, Mr. Sterling, you've been profiting from the work of this incompetent black nurse for years. Sterling sat in stunned silence as I continued pulling documents from my portfolio: medical degrees, business awards, Forbes covers with my picture prominently displayed, the evidence of a career and accomplishments he'd never bothered to consider possible. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Your medical care over the past 2 days has been exemplary. Dr. Martinez and I, yes, I've been consulting on your case, determined that your heart attack was minor. You'll make a full recovery with proper medication and lifestyle changes." Sterling nodded numbly, still processing the revelation. "However, your behavior toward nursing staff and your explicit threats to use your business relationship to harm someone's employment are problematic." I pulled out another document. "This is your company's contract with our hospital. As you can see, there's a clause about professional conduct and mutual respect that applies to all parties." Sterling's lawyer instincts seemed to kick in. "Now wait a minute, you can't terminate our contract because of a personal disagreement. Actually, I can, but I won't." I smiled, and it wasn't entirely friendly. "Instead, I'm going to offer you a choice. Option 1, you can apologize to every staff member you've insulted, make a substantial donation to our nursing education fund, and we'll continue our business relationship with the understanding that this behavior never happens again." "What's option 2? Sterling asked weakly. "Option 2 is that I terminate your contract today, make some phone calls to colleagues at other major hospitals, and you explain to your board of directors why Sterling Technologies just lost $200 million in annual healthcare contracts because you couldn't treat a black nurse with basic human decency." The silence in the room was deafening. Sterling's mind was clearly racing, calculating the financial and professional consequences of his bigotry. "There's also option 3, I added conversationally. "I could mention to some friends in the business press that Marcus Sterling, CEO of Sterling Technologies, spent 2 days in the hospital hurling racist insults at the nursing staff. I imagine that would make for interesting headlines." Sterling's face went white again. In the current business climate, that kind of publicity could destroy a company overnight. I'll take option 1, he said quietly. What followed was the most comprehensive public humbling I'd ever witnessed. Sterling, still in his hospital gown, was wheeled to every department where he'd interacted with staff. At each stop, he offered a formal apology that grew more sincere as the reality of his situation sank in. "I want to apologize for my behavior," he told the ER nursing staff, his voice shaking slightly. "I was wrong to treat anyone with disrespect, and I'm grateful for the excellent care you provided." Dr. Martinez accepted the apology graciously, though his expression suggested he was enjoying the moment more than he let on. The tour continued to the cardiac unit, the administrative offices, and finally back to where it had all started, the ER, where I was scheduled to work my regular nursing shift that evening. "Nurse Thompson," Sterling said, and this time the title carried respect rather than dismissal. "I owe you the deepest apology. Your care was exceptional, and my behavior was inexcusable. I was wrong about everything." I nodded professionally. "Apology accepted, Mr. Sterling. I hope your recovery goes well." But Sterling wasn't finished. "Can I ask you something? Why do you still work as a nurse? I mean, with your background, your wealth. Why?" It was a fair question, one I'd been asked by friends and family many times over the past 3 years. Because this is where I can make the most difference, I said simply. I can influence healthcare policy from a boardroom, but I can save lives with my own hands in this ER. Money is just a tool. This is the work that matters. Sterling nodded slowly, perhaps understanding for the first time that success could be measured in something other than profit margins and power over others. The story didn't end with Sterling's discharge that afternoon. True to his word, he made a substantial donation to our nursing education fund, $500,000, that would help train dozens of new nurses over the next several years. More importantly, Sterling Technologies implemented new sensitivity training for all executives and added clauses to their contracts requiring respectful treatment of healthcare workers at all client facilities. But the real change was personal. Sterling called me a week later, asking if we could meet for coffee. Not as business associates, but as two people who'd learned something important about assumptions and respect. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told me over coffee in the hospital cafeteria. "About making a difference. I've spent my entire career focused on building wealth and power, but I've never asked whether I was actually helping anyone." Over the following months, Sterling became one of our hospital's most thoughtful partners. His company developed new patient care technologies at cost, and he personally funded several community health initiatives. He also became an unexpected advocate for treating healthcare workers with respect, speaking at business conferences about the experience that had changed his perspective. "I learned that the person you dismiss as just a nurse might be the most accomplished person in the room," he would tell audiences. "More importantly, I learned that treating people with dignity isn't about their job title or bank account. It's about recognizing their humanity." I still work nursing shifts at Mercy General, though my story has made maintaining anonymity more challenging. Occasionally, a patient or family member recognizes me from business publications, but most of the time, I'm simply Nurse Thompson, exactly as I prefer it. The incident with Marcus Sterling taught me something important about the balance between changing systems from within and using position and power to demand change from above. For 3 years, I'd been content to lead by example, hoping that excellent patient care and respectful treatment would gradually shift hospital culture. Sterling's behavior reminded me that some people only understand power, and sometimes using that power is necessary to protect others who don't have the same advantages. The nursing staff at Mercy General now know they have someone in leadership who understands their challenges intimately, who's experienced firsthand both the joy of patient care and the frustration of being dismissed or disrespected. We've implemented policies ensuring that all patients and families treat staff with respect, with clear consequences for abusive behaviour. We've also created pathways for nurses to advance their education and careers, recognising that some of the smartest, most capable people in healthcare never get the opportunities they deserve. Marcus Sterling learned that making assumptions about people based on their appearance or job title can be costly in ways beyond money. He discovered that the black nurse he'd tried to have fired was not only his intellectual equal, but someone whose decisions directly affected his company's future. But perhaps most importantly, he learned that treating people with respect isn't a business strategy, it's a basic requirement of human decency. As for me, I learned that sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't patience or education or leading by example. Sometimes it's simply revealing who you really are and letting the consequences speak for themselves. The next time someone assumes that a black woman in scrubs couldn't possibly be anything more than just a nurse, I hope they remember Marcus Sterling's very expensive lesson in humility. After all, you never know who's really in charge.